Over the last couple of years, I've been mainly using two cameras to fly and record my flights. The 808-16 keychain camera is about £30, gives 720p performance, is nice, cheap and cheerful, and you can pretty much connect it to anything. And then we have the GoPro. This is actually my Hero 3 Silver Edition that's used for higher performance requirements, like slinging it underneath a hexcopter and recording aerial video, and that costs about 10 times as much as the 808-16, so it tends to get used a lot less. There's a new camera that's been around for a little while now, the Mobius camera, which I believe was developed by the same team that created the 808-16 keychain cam, but they've designed it from the bottom up with a much more sensible enclosure and improved optics and electronics. So it actually now provides a 1080p recording with much better clarity and performance for colour. So what we're going to do in this video is we're actually going to look at the specifications. We'll spend a bit of time looking at how you configure the Mobius camera, because you do need a little bit of software and there's a little process you go through. It isn't complicated, but I'll cover it. Then we'll look at the difference in the video performance between these three cameras. I'll put an elastic band around them and I'll connect them together, have a little walk around one of the local paths, and we'll see how they behave, and we can do a direct comparison and see how the Mobius stacks up against the 808-16, but also the GoPro as well. Then we'll spend a little time talking about FPV and how you connect it using a special cable, and I'll actually connect it live up to an immersion RC Fat Shark transmitter. And then finally, we'll do a quick summary. But before I get into the first part of that, which is going to be looking at the specification, I'd like to put a big thank you out to banggood.com for sending me this Mobius to review and have a play with. The Mobius is a camera that I've been toying with, trying out for a while, and Banggood have been fantastic and actually sent me this one to try out, play with and review. So thank you to those guys for sending this to me. And if you need any RC equipment, it's definitely worthwhile going to banggood.com. So let's look at the specs. So let's talk about a couple of the main bits and pieces regarding the Mobius camera. The first thing we need to talk about, of course, is what we talked about in the introduction, which is this is a 1080p camera that'll do 30 frames per second. It'll also do what's similar to the 808-16, which it'll do 720p in either 30 or 60 frames per second. It can store two video modes, which is a really nice feature. So you can have kind of a video 1 and a video 2 profile, so that you can have one that might do 1080p, 30 frames per second when you want the absolute maximum fidelity, or you might want to have a lower quality to maximize the amount of time on the SD card that you have. And it also obviously do AV out, so as well as recording and being at the front of the craft, it'll also pump that out the back so you can plug it into a transmitter. But it's kind of interesting when you compare this to the 808-16 camera, and you can immediately see that there's a couple of differences. The first is that the 808-16 doesn't do 1080p. It only has one video mode. The mounting options for it, because it's in that legacy keychain fob format, isn't brilliant. And the nice thing is with the Mobius, it actually comes with a little cradle that it snaps into that gives you a 1/4 inch standard bolt, which is what you get on the top of any tripod, really. And the Mobius is slightly heavier, but only slightly. If you want to configure this camera, then you have to download a couple of bits of software. The main one is called msetup.zip, and if you go to www.mobius-actioncam.com, and then in that area you go to the software user-guide, you'll find these links. So the msetup is something that you need to download, put onto your computer to do the configuration. And the one that I'm using here is version 3.0.3.0, released 17th September 2014. But what this does is in a very similar way to the 808-16 camera. If you've played with that, you have to basically create a configuration file on the SD card in the Mobius camera, and then use this software to change the settings in that file, and the next time the camera starts it reads in that configuration and changes what you need to. So what we'll do is I'll download this msetup bits and pieces first, and then we'll have a go and actually configure it. So before we get into configuration, we need to create that setting on the SD card, and it's very straightforward. What we're going to do is we're going to press and hold the mode button, and then we're going to, while keeping that pressed, press and hold the power button, and we're going to keep those two pressed for about 5 seconds, and the LED should flash 3 times, and then we know we have a file called sys.cfg.txt in the root of the SD card, and we're good for the next step. So let me take this slide off the screen, and I'll just create that sys.cfg.txt file. I'll install the msetup onto the netbook, and let's go on there and look at the configuration options for the camera. So here we are on the trusty netbook. This is the msetup that we've just been looking at. We don't have to formally install it, so long as you have the executable in a folder somewhere, then you just double click on it to run. I've connected the Mobius camera up to the PC using a standard USB cable, and what we're going to do is just double click msetup now to run it. And what it'll do, it'll find the camera, and you can see at the top it knows that it's the mobius-actioncam version 1.2, and it knows that because of that configuration file that it can see on the card. By clicking on that camera, then we get the ability to change everything here. So we'll sync the date and time, absolutely, because the video I've just shot has been with the old version before it was pre-configured. You can see it's telling me that new firmware is available. We're not going to change that now, we'll do it later. Timestamp, I will actually keep that on for the moment. Lens type, blah blah blah, artificial light frequency. This is what you change whether or not you're in the UK or the US. For things like fluorescence, for example, you get pulsing if it's set wrong. We're going to have it as PAL out, and we're going to have it as 4:3 because that looks nicer. We're going to power on auto record. We'll keep that off. You can change that so it just starts recording as soon as you power it on. The 808 similar. Power on delay, we'll do it fast. All the other bits and pieces look fine. Global recording settings, like the recording indicator on, I always turn that on all of mine so it's flashing when it's recording. No loop recording. Audio volume, we want audio as well. I like that recorded. It lets me hear what's happening with the motors when I play it back. Wide dynamic range off. That means that it'll the dark to light range in the video is different. I'll play with that later, and we'll look at that in another video. Standard data rate. I like a 15-minute clip length because some of my flights are a little bit longer than that. We're not going to rotate 180 degrees. I'm always going to mount it the right way up. No time-lapse photo. Now, this is the kind of cool thing. There's 2 modes here, mode 1 and mode 2. The first one is 1080p, 30 frames a second, and the other one I'm going to have it as 720p, 60 frames a second. Unfortunately, the way it's kind of working is it's cropping down to create a more narrow image, which gives us the 720, but I'm quite happy with that. That looks good for me. Advanced image settings, we can change everything here. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to set the parameters. Fantastic. We'll now disconnect the camera, and the camera is now configured. And if we want to come back in and do it again, I'd just disconnect the camera, reconnect it, and then click on it when it appears in the top. So that's pretty straightforward, nice and easy to do. And now what we'll do is we'll actually look at some comparative video between the Mobius, the 808 camera, and the trusty GoPro. So what we'll do is I'll actually put up the 3 simultaneous videos side by side onto the screen. What I'll do is I'll put the GoPro at the top running at 1080p, I'll put the Mobius in the bottom right hand corner, again 1080p, and the bottom left is the 808/16 at 720p. Now what I've tried to do here is I've tried to sync the videos as best as I possibly can. They were basically mounted together, held with an elastic band, and I've tried to keep them as stable as possible while I was walking along. But one of the things that's very apparent here is the way that the cameras are handling the light. So again, the GoPro's at the top, and you can see that it's trying to expose for the sky and keep the detail in the shadow, which is great. The 808-16 is doing what it normally does, which is overexpose the sky and expose the ground. And the Mobius is kind of doing a halfway house. Interestingly, the actual fidelity of the colours on the day, I would say, is being closely matched by the Mobius. This is a very slightly bluey cast, but the other two are struggling with it being such an overcast day. And as I move the camera around here, you can see that there's a slightly yellowy cast to the 808, and the GoPro is absolutely doing its best to try and give us some definition in the sky and down the canal that we're looking down here. Now interestingly, we've just walked up to the sun, so now we're walking away, and we'll see how it handles a slightly less bright sky. And we can see here that the GoPro performance compared to the 808 and the Mobius is giving much better range of clarity and colours than the 808 camera. We're getting a much nicer, clearer image. It's 1080p, of course we will, but the colours are much richer as well and much closer to the GoPro. And in fact, here the GoPro and the Mobius is very similar. And as I zoom into this kind of big mushroom that was in the side, I say zoom in, I actually just held the cameras closer to it because none of these cameras have zoom. You can see that the Mobius, as an FPV camera in particular, is doing a really nice job. So hopefully that's going to give you an idea of the difference between all of these cameras here and their performance as FPV and normal cameras. I would say, I'm very pleased with the Mobius with the colour reproduction, and with the dynamic range of the camera. It's much better than the 808-16, and in fact for FPV I think it's probably better in that instance than the GoPro. So let's now look at how we connect the camera up to do FPV. So while we're looking at the Mobius camera a little bit more closely, let me point out a few of the key features. These two silver things on the top are not actually buttons, they're heat sinks for some of the electronics internally, which I think is a nice idea. You have 3 buttons on the top. You have a power, a mode, and the video start stop as well. The mode allows you to change the mode between obviously taking a photo and the 2 video modes that we set up in settings. At the front is the lens, by the side of that is the microphone, and on the back is the SD card slot, another little LED that flashes to show that it's recording, which is a nice idea, and the USB cable port. Now, as part of the pack, what came with mine was this little cradle, which has a 1/4 inch screw thread at the bottom, and that just snaps onto the camera like this. And that then allows you to connect it to anything with a standard screw thread for things like a tripod and other bits and pieces. I think it's a great addition. It's going to make it a piece of cake to mount on something like handlebars on a bicycle or something else if you're BMXing or going through a trail. The other nice thing about having the USB port at the back is if we look at the 808-16 camera, then you see that the USB port was actually at the side. Now the big problem with that is whenever I was connecting it up for FPV, that extra weight and the cable coming out of one side of the camera tended to pull that side down a little bit. So no matter how I tried, my FPV video that I recorded always looked a little bit skew with. The cable coming out the back is a great idea. It means it doesn't have that weight dragging down one side of the camera, particularly if it's on an anti-vibration mount, where that weight will push it off skew. Now, one thing you've probably noticed here on these cables is that I tend to write which camera the cable is for. And that's really something that I would recommend that you do every time, because each of these cables is slightly different. So you can't use an 808/16 USB cable that you have already on the Mobius camera and vice versa. So let's have a look at the cable that you need. Now the Mobius that I got, I didn't get it from Banggood with the AV cable, so I had to order that. And a lot of the cables that are coming come with this short piece that I've modified, but with a 3 pigtails that connect onto the servo connectors. One RCA connector for video, one for power, and one for the audio out as well. Now that's fine, but these don't work really well if you're going to use an FPV transmitter. So if we're looking here at a little 25 milliwatt immersion RC video transmitter for FPV, you'll notice that they very carefully mark what each of the pins are. What's easy to do is actually to modify the power connector that comes on one of the pigtails. Just move them around so that the red wire is on the one side, the black wire for ground is in the middle, and the video is on the other side, and that fits beautifully into the connector for the immersion RC and Fat Shark transmitter, and then there you are, you're good to go and FPV. So that makes it very straightforward. So now we've seen in the video how you set it up, how you configure it, how it kind of works, compared it actual video performance with a very expensive GoPro and a nice cheap as chips 808/16, and we've also looked at how we configure it and connect it to an immersion RC system for FPV. So in summary, let me say a very big thank you to Banggood.com for sending me this camera again. Thanks for giving me something else to play with in these dark winter months. And for those of you that have stayed right through to the end, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.